Major Dick Winters stood in a shell-damaged German farmhouse in early 1945, looking down at a dead SS officer sprawled across the floor. The man had been killed hours earlier in the firefight that cleared this sector of Bavaria. Now, as Winters' men searched the building for intelligence, a sergeant called out, "Sir, you need to see this." What they found in that officer's personal effects would haunt Winters for the rest of his life. Not because of what it was, but because of what he chose to do about it. This is the story of buried treasure, battlefield honor, and a decision that defined the character of America's most respected combat leader. The incident happened during the final weeks of World War II, as Easy Company, the legendary unit later immortalized in Band of Brothers, pushed deep into Germany. The war was essentially over. Hitler was in his bunker, German forces were collapsing everywhere, and it was just a matter of time before the surrender. But these final weeks were strange, chaotic, filled with unexpected discoveries. The Allied advance through Germany had revealed things nobody anticipated. Concentration camps with their unimaginable horrors. Hidden weapons factories buried in mountains. And treasure. Massive amounts of it. The Nazis had looted Europe for years, and as their regime collapsed, stashes of gold, artwork, jewelry, and currency were being discovered everywhere. The SS officer Winters' men had killed was carrying documents, as many German officers were at war's end. Maps, orders, official papers. But tucked in his jacket, separate from the military documents, was something else. A hand-drawn map with coordinates, landmarks, and detailed instructions. It was clearly personal, not military. The sergeant who found it studied it for a moment, then brought it to Winters. "Major, I think this is a treasure map. Look at these markings, distances, directions, depth measurements. And these notes mention gold and valuables." Winters examined the map carefully. The sergeant was right. This wasn't military intelligence. It was directions to something buried, hidden by this SS officer somewhere in the Bavarian countryside. The notations mentioned specific items, gold coins, jewelry taken from collections, a chilling euphemism that Winters understood immediately, even an estimated value that made the men around him whistle low. "How much you figure that's worth, sir?" one of the soldiers asked. Winters did some mental calculation. Based on the gold weight alone, even conservative estimates put it in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Millions in today's money. Split among Easy Company, every man there could go home wealthy. The soldiers looked at their commander, waiting. This was decision time. Everyone in that room knew what the decision meant. The SS officer was dead. Nobody else knew about this map. They were in a remote area, could easily slip away for a few hours, dig up whatever was buried, and nobody would ever know. War's end chaos provided perfect cover. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Dick Winters folded the map and put it in his jacket pocket. "I'll handle this," he said. The men nodded, trusting their commander, probably already imagining what they'd do with their share. What Winters did next surprised nobody who actually knew him, but it became a defining moment that revealed his character more clearly than any combat action. He walked to the intelligence officer's tent and turned the map over. Just handed it in with the other captured documents, logged it officially, and walked away. When the intel officer asked if Winters had examined it, he simply said, "It appears to be information about hidden valuables. Should probably go to the proper authorities for investigation." That was it. No drama, no second thoughts, no keeping a copy for later. He gave it up without hesitation. When word got back to the men of Easy Company, and of course it did, news travels fast in a military unit, reactions were mixed. Some understood immediately. Others felt he'd thrown away their chance at life-changing wealth. A few were angry, thinking Winters had been naive or sanctimonious. Years later, in interviews and in his autobiography, Winters explained his thinking. And his reasoning reveals something important about the generation that fought World War II. First, there was the question of what that treasure represented. This wasn't lost pirate gold or a random find. This was almost certainly property stolen from victims, Jewish families, political prisoners, people murdered by the SS. Taking it would make him complicit in that theft, would be profiting from genocide. I didn't want any part of blood money, Winters said simply. Second, there was the matter of orders and law. Captured enemy property was supposed to be turned over to authorities. Military regulations were clear. Yes, enforcement was spotty in the chaos of war's end. And yes, plenty of soldiers were pocketing souvenirs and more. But regulations existed for reasons, and Winters believed in following them. Third, and this was what really defined Winters, there was the question of what kind of men he wanted his soldiers to be. He'd spent years training them, leading them, trying to instill discipline and values. If he kept that map, used it for personal gain, what message did that send? That rules only matter when convenient. That taking is fine as long as you don't get caught. I wanted them to go home as better men than when they left, Winters explained decades later. Not just better soldiers, but better people. How could I ask them to maintain standards if I couldn't maintain them myself? There's a postscript to this story that makes it even more interesting. In the 1990s, after Band of Brothers brought renewed attention to Easy Company, researchers started digging into various incidents and stories. Someone found references to that map in official records. It had indeed been turned over to military intelligence, investigated, and used to recover a cache of valuables that were eventually returned to victims' families and institutions robbed by the Nazis. The treasure was real. Winters could have been wealthy. Instead, the property went back to its rightful owners or their descendants. When asked if he ever regretted the decision, Winters was characteristically direct. Not for 1 second. I didn't fight my way across Europe to become a thief. I fought to stop thieves. Some of his men eventually came to appreciate what he'd done. Others probably never did, still thinking about what that money could have meant for their futures. But here's what's interesting. In all the years after the war, through all the Easy Company reunions and interviews, nobody ever seriously challenged Winters' decision. Nobody called him a fool or suggested he'd been wrong. Because deep down, even the men who'd wanted that treasure understood something important. Dick Winters had given them something more valuable than gold. He'd given them the ability to look back on their service with pride, knowing they'd maintained their integrity even when it would have been easy not to. The treasure map is probably still in some archive somewhere, a footnote in the massive documentation of World War II. But the story of what Dick Winters did with it, that's treasure of a different kind, a reminder that character isn't what you do when people are watching, but what you do when nobody would ever know the difference. Winters made his choice in a damaged farmhouse in Bavaria in 1945.